The wine hit first. Cold, dark, deliberate. It spread across the white fabric like something alive, unstoppable, irreversible, designed to be seen by every person in that ballroom. And they all saw it. 300 people. Crystal chandeliers dripping gold light from the ceiling. Tables dressed in ivory linen. Manhattan visible through the floor-to-ceiling windows, glittering and indifferent 60 floors below. The kind of room where money didn't need to announce itself. It already knew. Zaire Maddox didn't move. He sat straight in the gilded chair, hands flat on his thighs, eyes forward. The wine soaked through the chest of his white suit. Deep red bleeding into pristine fabric like a wound, and he didn't flinch, didn't blink, didn't give the man standing over him a single thing worth taking. That was the only card he still had left. Nothing. "You always did know how to make an entrance," Cassiel Rourke said, loud enough for the 4 nearest tables to hear every syllable. He tilted the bottle back upright slowly, deliberately, smiled at the audience without looking for them. "Coming back here, in white of all things, that's bold, Zaire. I'll give you that." A few people laughed. Most didn't. Most just looked away. That was worse. Cassiel set the bottle down on the table beside Zaire's untouched champagne glass. He leaned in close, too close, and dropped his voice to something that only the nearest ears could catch. "You thought disappearing for a year would make people forget? They don't forget. They just stopped caring. That's different." Zaire's jaw tightened. One muscle, barely visible. He controlled it. "Hi, viewers. Have you ever stayed quiet in a moment when everything inside you was screaming? Drop a yes in the comments if you know exactly what that silence costs. Because what was happening inside Zaire Maddox right now had nothing to do with weakness. It had everything to do with survival math. The kind you learn after the first time the room chooses someone else over you. The wine wasn't the humiliation. The quiet was. 300 people watching a man get taken apart piece by piece in real time, and not one of them moved. Silence in rooms like this is not neutral. It is permission. Cassiel straightened, adjusted the front of his jacket. He was built for this sharp jaw, political smile, the easy confidence of someone who had never once questioned whether he belonged anywhere. He ran 2 Senate campaigns before 34. He knew exactly how to make a crowd feel like it was watching something it deserved to see. He was reaching for Zaire's arm, fingers already closing, when the sound stopped him. Not loud, not aggressive, just present. "You're making a mistake." The room shifted. Every head turned. The man standing at the edge of the gathering hadn't walked in through the main entrance. No one had seen him arrive. He was simply there, still controlled, watching, like he had been there the whole time and the rest of them had only just noticed. Tall, dark suit with no tie, eyes that didn't move fast. The kind of man who didn't need to raise his voice because his voice was already the loudest thing in the room. Cassiel Rourke turned slowly. "I'm sorry. And you are?" The man didn't answer that. He looked at Zaire instead. And that, right there, was the first thing that didn't make sense. Nobody looked at Zaire Maddox anymore. That had been the unspoken agreement for the past 14 months. You didn't acknowledge him directly. You whispered. You referenced. You used him as a cautionary example in conversations about reputation management and bad decisions. But you didn't look at him not like that. Not like he was the only person worth paying attention to in a room full of 300. The stranger looked at him exactly like that. Zaire met his eyes once, then looked away. Cassiel stepped forward, inserting himself into the line of sight the way he always did. Naturally, instinctively, like the space between two people was something that belonged to him by default. "This is a private event. Invitation only." "I know." The man's voice was even, unhurried. I was invited. Cassiel's smile didn't change, but something behind his eyes did. I don't recognize you. That's a you problem. A few people near the back of the crowd made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh. More like a sharp exhale. Surprise with nowhere to go. Cassiel recovered fast. That was his gift. Look, whatever this is, it doesn't involve you. Walk away. The man didn't walk anywhere. He moved not toward Cassiel, not toward the center of the gathering. He moved sideways. Slightly. Just enough to shift his angle toward Zaire. Like the rest of the conversation was background noise he had already filed and dismissed. Did you ask him to stop? He said. Quiet. Direct. Zaire blinked. What? Did you ask for help? The question landed wrong. Not because it was cruel. Because it wasn't. It was specific, and specificity in a room full of performance felt like a trap. Zaire looked at him for a long second. No. The man nodded once. Good. That wasn't the response anyone in that room expected. Not sympathy. Not outrage on Zaire's behalf. Not the standard hero script where someone steps in, chest puffed, ready to make it about themselves. Just good. Like Zaire's refusal to beg had been the correct answer to a test he hadn't known he was taking. Cassiel's jaw moved. I don't know who you think you are. Vance Devereaux. He said it plainly. No weight behind it. No performance. The name landed in the room like a stone into still water, and the ripples moved fast. A woman near the bar stopped mid-sentence. Two men in the back exchanged one glance and said nothing else. Someone's assistant pulled out a phone. Cassiel's composure held. Barely. He turned back to face Devereaux fully now. Both of them square, the ballroom rearranged around them without anyone moving a single step. Whatever your reputation is outside these walls. I'm not interested in my reputation right now. Devereaux finally looked at Cassiel, and the room got cold. Not loud, not violent, just cold. I'm interested in the pattern, he said. And you've made it very clear tonight. Cassiel opened his mouth. Devereaux's phone screen lit up. He didn't check it. He didn't need to. But two other phones buzzed across the room. One near the bar, one at the east table. And both men who received those messages stood just a little bit straighter. Then one of them quietly, without drawing attention to himself, stepped away from Cassiel's circle. Cassiel noticed. That was the point. Zaire sat still in his chair, watching, turning something over in his mind that didn't have a clean answer yet. Men like Vance Devereaux didn't step into rooms like this without a reason. And the reason, Zaire was starting to understand, had nothing to do with charity. Nobody was expecting calm. That was the thing. The crowd had leaned in. Shoulders tilted, conversations dropped to a murmur, because this was the part where it escalated. Where it got physical or loud, or at minimum dramatic enough to be talked about for the rest of the season. Cassiel Rourke had been publicly confronted. His pride ran deep and his tolerance for disrespect ran shallow. Everyone in that room had watched him operate long enough to know what came next. Except it didn't come. Devereaux didn't raise his voice once. He stood with his hands loose at his sides and he spoke to Cassiel the way a man speaks to a decision he has already made. Not with heat, but with conclusion. You have donors in this room who have been watching you all night. They weren't watching your speech. They were watching this. A slight gesture toward Zaire, toward the wine-stained white fabric, toward the whole scene Cassiel had constructed so carefully. And what they saw, what they're still seeing right now, is a man who needs an audience to feel powerful. Cassiel's jaw clenched. You don't know anything about power. No. Devereaux tilted his head fractionally. You've mistaken cruelty for power. Those are different things. Cruelty needs a witness. Power doesn't. Silence. Real silence. The kind that presses. Cassiel took one step forward, the aggressive kind, the kind designed to shrink space and reclaim it, and Devereaux didn't move a single inch backward. Just watched him close the distance with the same expression someone wears when they already know how a story ends. "You want to make this into something it isn't," Cassiel said, voice lower now. Controlled. The political mask slipping back on. "Zaire is a private matter. Our history is not relevant to what I'm talking about." "Then what exactly are you talking about?" Devereaux was quiet for exactly 2 seconds. "Your donors." Cassiel blinked. That was all. Just a blink. But in a man built for composure, a blink like that was the equivalent of stumbling. Devereaux turned his head. Not his body, just his head, and looked toward a cluster of men near the main bar. The look lasted less than 3 seconds. He looked back at Cassiel. Across the room, 2 of those men finished their drinks, set the glasses down, excused themselves from the conversation they were standing in, and walked quietly, without spectacle, toward the exit side of the room. Not away from the event. Away from Cassiel. Cassiel turned to look. Couldn't stop himself. And the moment he turned, Devereaux spoke again. Quiet, like it was barely worth saying. "Real power doesn't perform. It repositions." Cassiel spun back. His voice was tight now. "You think sending a few texts is going to—" "I didn't send any texts tonight." The words sat there. Cassiel's eyes dropped to Devereaux's hands. Both of them at his sides. Phone untouched. And then 2 more men peeled away from Cassiel's orbit across the room. No signal. No coordination anyone could point to. Just movement. Quiet, individual, final. Zaire watched it happen from his chair. He understood networks. He understood rooms. He had grown up learning to read the invisible architecture of power, who deferred to whom, who held real weight versus performed it. He had watched Cassiel dismantle people inside these gatherings for 3 years. What Devereaux just did in under 6 minutes, without a raised voice, without a threat anyone could quote, without a single visibly deliberate action, was something different. It wasn't an attack. It was a demonstration. And the scariest demonstrations, Zaire had learned, were the ones that didn't look like anything at all. Cassiel's closest donor, the man who never left his side at these events, the one who had laughed at the wine joke 4 minutes ago, quietly, without eye contact, turned his back and resumed a different conversation. Just like that, like Cassiel had become background noise. Cassiel felt it before he understood it. That particular kind of panic. Not the loud kind, not the kind that shows on your face right away. The kind that starts in your chest as a tightening. As the realization that the floor is shifting and you cannot find the edge of the tile that moved first. He looked around the ballroom. 3 minutes ago, this room was his. He had engineered that. The seating arrangements. The timing of his entrance. The placement of the wine, even the performance of it, had been calculated to send a message to people who mattered. That he was still in control. That Zaire Maddox returning to these circles changed nothing. Now he was counting exits. The 2 donors near the bar, gone from his side. Marcus Hale, his lead campaign sponsor, currently absorbed in a conversation on the far east end of the room, back turned, body language closed. The senator's aide who had promised him 15 minutes of FaceTime tonight had, apparently, found somewhere else to be. None of it looked coordinated. That was the worst part. It looked like natural movement, like people just drifting, reorganizing, choosing. Cassiel turned back to Devereaux. "Whatever game you think you're playing, I'm not playing anything." Devereaux's voice hadn't changed once in the past 10 minutes. Same temperature, same pace. "I'm standing in a room. That's all. You're threatening me." "With what?" Cassiel's teeth pressed together. His hands came up, not in violence, not yet, but in that particular way that meant the composure was running thin at the edges. He turned his head and looked directly at Zaire. Something about Zaire's stillness had started to infuriate him in a way that made no logical sense. Zaire hadn't said a word, hadn't moved, hadn't done anything, and somehow that felt like losing. He grabbed Zaire's arm, hard, pulled him half out of the chair. "You don't get to come back here and let go." 2 words. From Devo. Not loud, not rushed. Delivered the way a man delivers a final warning when he's already past the point of warnings. He had moved. No one saw exactly when. He was simply closer now. 3 feet away, body angled, eyes locked on Cassiel's hand on Zaire's arm. The room around them had gone completely still. Even the string quartet near the back wall had stopped, though no one remembered them stopping. "Touch him again," Devo said. "And this room won't be your biggest problem tonight." Cassiel held on for exactly 1 more second. Then let go. He stepped back. Controlled, measured, like he was choosing to release rather than being forced to. His face reset. The political mask was back, smooth and practiced. He straightened his jacket, looked around at the faces watching him, and for the first time that evening he couldn't read what they were thinking. That terrified him more than anything Devo had said. He looked at Zaire one last time. His expression didn't hold rage. It held something colder, something that said this conversation wasn't finished, just relocated. Then he turned and walked across the ballroom and didn't look back. The room breathed. Zaire's arm ached where the grip had been. He didn't rub it. He sat upright in the stained white suit, in the gilded chair, and watched Cassiel's figure move through the crowd until it disappeared through the far corridor door. He didn't feel relief. He felt suspicious. He turned his head slowly and looked at Devo, who was already watching him, waiting. "Why?" Zaire thought. "Why did you do that? What does someone like you get out of this?" He didn't ask it yet, but the question was already awake, already restless, already refusing to be quiet. The ballroom recovered the way expensive rooms always do. Music resumed. Conversations rebuilt themselves from the bottom up. Waitstaff moved with restored purpose. Within 7 minutes, the entire thing had been folded into the evening's ambient noise. Something that happened. Something that would be discussed quietly in car rides home and over brunch next Sunday. But not here. Not openly. These rooms didn't do open. Zaire stood. He smoothed the front of his ruined jacket once. A reflex, not a hope, and reached for his champagne glass. Set it back down without drinking. His hand was still bleeding. Slow. From where the glass had cut the palm when he'd gripped the chair arm too tightly during the grab. He hadn't noticed until now. He pressed it against the inside seam of his jacket. Devo was 3 feet away. He hadn't left. That was the thing. Most men who made a statement like that, who performed that kind of controlled intervention in a room full of witnesses, they moved on, back to their purpose, back to their circle. The scene was over. The statement was made. You didn't linger. Devo lingered, not conspicuously. He had moved to stand near the window, looking out at the city below, a glass of water in his hand that he hadn't touched. Anyone watching would have said he was just a man taking a quiet moment at the edge of a loud gathering. But Zaire knew he was watching the reflection in the glass. Watching him, Zaire walked toward the window. Not fast. He stopped beside Devo, close enough to speak without being heard, and looked out at the same skyline without looking at him. "Why did you get involved?" Devo didn't answer right away. Let a beat pass. Then, "I don't like patterns." Zaire turned his head slightly. "What does that mean?" It means I've been in enough rooms to know when something's been repeated too many times. That's not an answer. No. A pause. It's not. Zaire's jaw tightened. He turned back to the window. Below, Manhattan moved the way it always moved, indifferent, continuous, swallowing everything. He breathed through his nose, controlled it. I didn't ask for help. I know. So what you did was my choice. Devereaux's voice was even, final, not defensive, not yours. Silence sat between them for a moment. Not uncomfortable. That was the strange part. It should have been uncomfortable. A man Zaire had never met, standing next to him at a window after the kind of scene that just played out, offering nothing useful and no explanation worth trusting. It wasn't uncomfortable, and that in itself was the problem. You endure too well, Devereaux said. The words landed in a way Zaire hadn't prepared for. Not cruelly, not as a compliment either. Just as an observation, clean, precise, like someone reading a page they had already read before and noting a detail they'd underlined. Zaire looked at him directly now. Meaning what, exactly? Devereaux looked back. For a moment he said nothing. Then he set the untouched water glass down on the windowsill, turned without another word, and walked, unhurried, deliberate, through the crowd, past the string quartet, through the east corridor door. Gone. No explanation. No follow-up. Nothing to hold on to. Zaire stood at the window and watched the door settle closed behind him. His hand was still bleeding. His suit was still ruined. The room was already moving on around him like tonight had been nothing. But something about the way Devereaux had said those 3 words, quiet, certain, like he had been carrying that observation around before he ever walked into this ballroom, wouldn't let Zaire stand still. You endure too well. It wasn't sympathy. It was recognition. And from a man like Vance Devereaux, whoever he was, whatever tonight had actually been, recognition was not safe. Recognition meant he had already been looking, already been watching, before the ballroom, before the wine, before tonight, which meant the question wasn't why he had stepped in. The question was, how long had he been there? Outside in the corridor, 2 floors down, a black SUV idled at the curb, waiting, engine running. Nobody got in, nobody got out, just waiting. The file hit the desk at 2:47 in the morning. Not because Vance Devereaux had ordered it then, because that was when his analyst finished it, flagged it, sent it, and then immediately logged off without asking any questions. That was how things worked in Devereaux's organization. You delivered. You didn't comment. Vance sat in the low light of his office and looked at the name on the top of the folder. Zaire Maddox. He opened it. Standard background pull. Financials, residential history, social network mapping, professional record. The kind of document that told you the shape of a person's life without telling you what lived inside it. He had read hundreds of these. He usually skimmed them. He didn't skim this one. Zaire Maddox, 29. Born in Atlanta. Relocated to New York at 22. Built a quiet career in nonprofit consulting. Legitimate, respectable, the kind of work that kept you adjacent to money without making you the center of it. 3 addresses over 7 years. No criminal record. Clean credit. Functional, ordinary, unremarkable on paper. Except for one thing. 13 months ago, Zaire's professional history went clean. Too clean. The consulting firm he had worked for dissolved. The nonprofit board he had sat on restructured with his name quietly removed from all public records. 2 references that should have existed gone. Even a conference presentation he had given, documented in 3 separate industry publications, had been quietly scrubbed from the hosting organization's website. Not deleted carelessly, removed with intention. Vance sat back. People didn't erase themselves from their own professional record unless something had forced them to. A legal situation. A threat. Witness protection. Possible but unlikely given the social exposure he still maintained. Or someone else had done the erasing for them. Someone with the right kind of access and the right kind of motivation. He turned to the second section. The missing year. 13 months ago to approximately 4 months ago, Zaire Maddox had no verifiable address. No lease. No utility accounts. 2 credit card transactions in that window, both in cash equivalent categories, both in the same zip code in upstate New York. The same zip code. Vance looked at it for a long moment. He pulled a second file. Older. An incident report from 31 months ago. A territorial conflict involving a mid-level operation out of Albany. The kind of thing that got handled quietly. 3 names connected to the incident, 2 of them resolved, 1 outstanding. He cross-referenced the zip code. It matched. He put the 2 files side by side and looked at them without moving. This was the part where most people would reach a conclusion. Connect the obvious points, write the obvious story. Zaire Maddox had a connection, knowingly or not, to an event that had cost Vance's organization real resources and real trust. But Vance didn't move toward conclusions. He moved toward questions. Because Zaire at the ballroom tonight hadn't moved like a man with something to protect. He had moved like a man who had already lost everything worth protecting and was still deciding whether to care about what was left. That was a specific kind of stillness. Vance had seen it before. Only once. In a mirror. He closed the file. Set it face down on the desk. Stood and walked to the window. Manhattan was still below. Quiet from this height, which was a lie, but a beautiful one. He thought about 3 words. You endure too well. He hadn't planned to say that. It had come out as observation, which was a problem. Because observation implied attention. And attention directed at someone connected, even tangentially to an unresolved incident, was a liability. He knew that. He stood at the window until 4 a.m. Then he picked up his phone and made a call. Find out, he said, what Zaire Maddox was doing in Albany, and find out who put him there. He ended the call before the other person could respond. Outside, the city moved the way it always moved. But somewhere in the data trail of a man in a ruined white suit, something didn't add up. And Vance Devereaux had never been able to leave a thing that didn't add up alone. The gallery was closed to the public on Tuesdays. Zaire knew that. He also knew, the moment he walked through the side entrance that had been left unlocked, specifically deliberately unlocked, that the invitation he had received by courier that morning was not actually an invitation. It was a summons. He stopped just inside the door. The space was long and narrow. High ceilings. Track lighting pointed at paintings that probably cost more than most people's homes. No staff visible. No other guests. Just art and quiet and the kind of curated stillness that money built around itself. And at the far end, near a large canvas painted almost entirely in black, Vance Devereaux stood with his hands in his pockets, waiting, like he had known exactly when Zaire would arrive. Zaire walked toward him. Not fast. He let his footsteps be heard. Let the sound of his shoes on the hardwood say what his expression wasn't going to, that he had come, that he wasn't afraid of coming, and that he was going to need more than a gallery and a locked door to feel anything close to cornered. He stopped 6 feet away. You arranged this, Zaire said. Yes. No pretense. No social cushioning. Zaire almost respected that. Why? Vance looked at him. Because what I found in your file doesn't match what I saw at the ballroom. And I don't like gaps. Zaire's expression didn't shift, but something behind his eyes did, quick, involuntary, The kind of reaction you can't fully train out of yourself when someone walks into a room knowing more than they should. You ran a file on me. I run files on everyone. That's not an answer. No. A pause. It's context. Zaire looked away, looked at the black painting, let himself breathe for exactly 1 second, then looked back. What do you think you found? Albany. 1 word. And the effect it had on Zaire's body was small. A tightening across the shoulders, barely visible, gone in under a second, but Vance saw it. And from the way Vance's eyes moved, Zaire knew he had. You don't know what that was, Zaire said. Not yet. And you think I'm going to tell you? No. Vance's voice was even. I think you're going to confirm something, whether you say a word or not. Zaire's hands stayed still at his sides. He kept his jaw loose, kept his breathing measured. He had learned, over a very long and very specific season of his life, how to hold a conversation that was really an interrogation and give away nothing. He was giving something away right now. He could feel it. You're not just someone's victim, Vance said. The words hit like a thumb pressed directly on a bruise. Not because they were cruel, because they were accurate. Because the entire narrative that had followed Zaire through every room he had walked into for the past 14 months. The fallen golden omega, the cautionary tale, the man Cassiel Rourke had destroyed for sport. That narrative had been a costume. Useful, protective, intentionally worn. And Vance Devereaux had just pulled at the thread. Don't, Zaire said. Quiet. Final. You reacted. I said don't. For the first time since they had been standing in this gallery, something shifted in Vance's expression. Not warmth, not sympathy, something more like recognition. The same thing Zaire had seen in his eyes at the window in the ballroom. Tell me what you're hiding, Vance said. Zaire looked at him for a long-held moment. Then he turned, walked back toward the side entrance, his footsteps steady. His hands not shaking, though they wanted to. He pushed the door open. Cold air hit him from the street. He didn't look back, but he heard Vance's voice follow him through the space. Quiet, unhurried, certain. You'll come back. Zaire stepped out into the afternoon. The door closed behind him. He stood on the sidewalk for 3 seconds, then started walking, fast. The car had been following him for 4 blocks before Zaire acknowledged it. Not because he hadn't noticed. He had noticed after the first block, dark blue sedan, no plates visible from this angle, keeping a fixed distance with the kind of disciplined spacing that didn't happen by accident. He had noticed. He had just needed 4 blocks to figure out whether he was going to pretend he hadn't. He turned down a side street. The car turned with him. That settled it. He pulled out his phone. No signal on this block, which was unusual for Midtown, and unusual enough to mean something. He kept walking. Head up, pace even. Everything about his body language communicating that he was not concerned, which was a complete lie, but a lie with a purpose. Because if they were watching his reaction, giving them panic was giving them information. The car slowed. Then it stopped at the curb 30 feet behind him. A door opened. Zaire's entire body went cold. He didn't run. Running confirmed fear. Running told whoever was in that car exactly what they needed to know about how much leverage they had. He kept walking. Footsteps behind him now. 1 set. Measured. Then tires. A different vehicle. From the other end of the block, a black SUV came in fast, pulled hard to the curb 2 feet ahead of him, and the passenger door swung open before the vehicle had fully stopped. Vance Devereaux looked out at him from the back seat. Get in. Zaire stopped walking. The footsteps behind him had stopped too. He could feel the geometry of it. Caught between 2 points, the blue sedan behind, the SUV in front, and no clean exit on either side of a street that had, in the past 30 seconds, become extremely narrow. He got in. The door closed. The SUV moved. Zaire sat straight in the seat. Didn't look at Vance immediately. Looked forward through the partition at the driver. Then at the side mirror where the blue sedan had pulled back out and was keeping pace 2 car lengths behind. "That car has been following you since you left the gallery," Vance said. "I know. You knew and you kept walking toward a dead-end block. I was working through options. You had no options." Vance's voice held no judgment, just precision. "That sedan is connected to a network Cassiel Rourke activated 2 days ago. Not for humiliation this time." Zaire turned his head. Vance met his eyes. He made calls, Zaire, to people who handle situations quietly. "You understand what I mean by that?" Pause on that, because what Vance was saying cleanly without theater was that Cassiel Rourke had moved past public humiliation, past social erasure, past the performance of control that had defined every interaction Zaire had survived in the past 14 months. He had escalated to something that didn't have an audience, something permanent. Zaire's jaw was tight. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because you need to know. That's not a reason. That's a fact." "Why do you care whether I know it?" Vance looked at him for a moment that stretched past comfortable. Then, from somewhere behind them, loud, sudden, wrong, a crack of impact. The rear left side of the SUV jumped. Glass somewhere behind them cracked. The driver accelerated hard. No announcement, no explanation, just speed. And Zaire's body was pressed back into the seat as the vehicle moved through a yellow light, then a red one, then a gap between 2 trucks that shouldn't have fit but did. Zaire's hand was gripping the door handle. His knuckles had gone white. The sedan was still behind them, 2 blocks back, then 1, then gone, cut off by a van that moved into the intersection from a side street at a moment too precise to be coincidence. The SUV kept moving. Vance hadn't flinched once. Zaire looked at him. "Was that a gunshot?" Vance looked back. "Yes." The driver didn't speak. He moved through the city like the city owed him a path, cutting, adjusting, doubling back through a parking structure and out a different exit, onto a bridge that Zaire didn't recognize, then off it again onto a route that stopped making geographic sense after the 3rd turn. Zaire sat with his back against the seat and his hands flat on his thighs and focused on breathing at a normal rate, which was harder than it sounded when someone had just put a bullet into the vehicle you were sitting in. He looked at his hands. Steady. That surprised him. Vance was on the phone, low, clipped conversation that lasted under 90 seconds. He wasn't panicking. He wasn't performing calm either. He was just operating. Like this was a problem with a known set of solutions and the only question was sequencing. He ended the call. "The sedan was registered to a shell company out of Newark," he said. 3 layers deep. That level of cover takes planning. This wasn't reactive, it was scheduled. Zaire absorbed that. Meaning Cassiel started this before the ballroom. Meaning the ballroom may have accelerated a timeline that already existed. Zaire turned that over. Slowly. With the kind of careful attention he gave to things that had sharp edges. If Cassiel had been planning this before last week, before Zaire had even walked back into those rooms, then the humiliation at the charity event hadn't been about control at all. It had been a goodbye, a final public marking before a private ending. The realization hit differently than fear. It hit like arithmetic. Cold. Inevitable. Already solved. "You intervened at the ballroom," Zaire said. "And now they've escalated." Vance looked at him directly. "Yes. So I'm not the only target. You were never just the target." Vance's voice was even. "You were the opening. They used you to surface me, to see how I'd respond, to measure what you meant to me before deciding how to use that." Zaire stared at him. What I meant to you. He let that sit for a moment. We had never met before that night. Cassiel didn't know that. The SUV turned again. Settled into a long straight stretch of road that felt like it was leading away from the city. The lights outside the window had thinned. Buildings had given way to trees. Zaire looked at the passing dark outside and let the pieces arrange themselves. Someone had told Cassiel there was a connection between Zaire and Vance Devereaux. A connection that didn't exist. Which meant someone had manufactured that information and fed it to Cassiel deliberately. To put both of them in motion. To create a situation where Vance would surface, respond, and expose his position. Zaire was bait. Had been bait. And he hadn't even known what table he was sitting on. His hands had stopped being steady. This started before the ballroom, he said. Not a question. Yes, Vance said. How far before? Vance was quiet for 3 seconds. Albany, he said. The word dropped into the car like a stone. Zaire's breath caught. Once. He controlled it. You need to tell me, Vance said, what you were doing there. Not because I'm accusing you. Because the people who put you there are the same people who just shot at this vehicle. And right now, the only thing standing between you and a second attempt is the fact that they don't know where we're going. Zaire looked at the window, at his own reflection in the dark glass. He looked tired. Not the tired from tonight, the older kind. The kind that lived in the body after months of carrying something you couldn't put down and couldn't explain. He breathed out slowly. The SUV pulled off the main road. Gravel crunched under the tires. A structure appeared through the trees. Low, dark, isolated. The safe house. Zaire looked at it as the car stopped. Then looked at Vance. Albany, he said quietly, is where I went after I found out Cassiel had been using my name to move money for people who should never have had access to my name. Silence. And the people who helped me disappear, Zaire said, are the same people who are now trying to make sure I stay disappeared. The engine cut off. Outside nothing. Just trees. Just dark. Just the specific kind of quiet that meant they were alone. For now. The safe house smelled like cedar and old heat. Someone had been here recently. A lamp on a low table was still warm to the touch, and there was water in the kettle. Prepared. Expected. Vance's people moved before he arrived. That was something Zaire filed without commenting on. He sat on the edge of a wooden chair near the window and looked out at the tree line. Nothing moved out there. That was both reassuring and not. Vance stood near the door for a moment, listening the way people who have survived long enough listen, with their whole body and not just their ears. Then he crossed the room, pulled a chair from the table, sat across from Zaire at a distance that wasn't close but wasn't distant. Intentional. Neither of them spoke for a long moment. The silence wasn't uncomfortable. That was the second time Zaire had noticed that. He didn't know what to do with it. You should have told me at the gallery, Vance said finally. You were interrogating me. I was asking. From behind a file you had compiled without my knowledge. Zaire looked at him. That's an interrogation with better furniture. Something moved in Vance's expression. Not quite a smile. Something adjacent to it. Gone fast. Cassiel didn't just humiliate you, Zaire said. He's been running something through channels that should have been sealed. For at least 2 years. Possibly longer. I found the first evidence by accident. A discrepancy in a financial report I was auditing for a nonprofit board. Numbers that didn't close. Names that looped back on themselves. He stopped, pressed his hands together. I didn't understand what I was looking at. Not at first. But you kept looking. I kept looking. Vance was watching him with the kind of attention that didn't demand anything. Just present. Receiving. Zaire had spent so long in rooms where attention came with cost attached that this kind of quiet focus felt like a foreign language he was only half fluent in. Albany was a contact, Zaire said. Someone who could confirm what I'd found. Someone outside Cassiel's network. He paused. It worked. For about 6 weeks. Then Cassiel's people found the contact. And after that, he looked back at the window. I stopped being a person with a career and a name and started being a problem someone needed to manage. Silence. The trees outside didn't move. The white suit, Vance said. Zaire looked at him. At the ballroom. Vance's voice was careful now. Quieter. You wore white. In a room full of people who'd already written you off. That wasn't an accident. Zaire's jaw tightened. No. You were making yourself visible. I was making myself a target that was hard to ignore. He looked at Vance directly. I needed someone to move, to surface, to show me who Cassiel would reach for if I showed up again. I needed to know who was protecting him. A long beat passed. You used yourself as bait, Vance said. Yes. And I walked into the room. You walked into the room. Another silence. Different from the ones before. Heavier. With more inside it. You didn't know who I was, Vance said. Not specifically. You just needed someone to react. I needed the room to move, Zaire said. You were the only one who did. He looked down at his hands. The cut on his palm had closed into a thin dark line. I didn't plan for you. You were the only thing in that room that felt real. The words came out quieter than he'd intended. He didn't take them back. Vance sat with that for a moment. The way he sat with everything, without rushing it, without making it smaller than it was. This isn't your problem, Zaire said. The money trail. Cassiel. Whatever Albany started. That's mine. You can drop me at the nearest. It's mine now. Slow. Certain. The way Vance said everything that mattered. Zaire looked at him. You walked into a room I was in, Vance said. With a plan, with evidence, with a year of surviving alone. And you used a white suit and a wine stain to surface a network I've been trying to locate for 8 months. A pause. That's not a stranger's problem. Zaire opened his mouth. Closed it. Vance's phone buzzed on the table between them. He looked at it. His expression didn't change. But he stood. Crossed to the window. Not the one Zaire was watching, the one on the opposite wall. Facing the road they had come in on. He looked out for exactly 4 seconds. Get away from that window, he said. His voice was quiet. But the temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Zaire moved. Outside. Just visible through the tree line. Engine off. Lights off. Sitting at the edge of the gravel path where the road curved. A car. Watching. Still. They had found them. Already. And the night, which had already asked more of both of them than it had any right to, was not finished yet. If this story hit something in you, drop a comment below. Tell us. Would you have walked back into that room? Would you have worn the white suit? Your answer matters more than you think. Share this with someone who needs to hear a story about what real strength looks like, not the loud kind. The kind that endures, plans, and refuses to stay erased. Subscribe to this channel and turn on notifications so you never miss a story like this one. Every week, we bring you narratives that go deeper than the surface. Stories about power, survival, and what happens when two people who were never supposed to find each other do. This story continues. And where it goes next, you are not ready for. We'll see you there.